Hey, friends! For Memorial Day, I thought I'd find an appropriate movie for you. So this time, we're talking about Story of G.I. Joe from 1945. Our story goes like this. War correspondent Ernie Pyle arrives in Italy just as U.S. forces are about to make a big push. The unit he's embedded with are green. They haven't tasted battle yet, but are confident and morale is high. Then they get a shellacking, which knocks them down a peg or two. Pyle continues covering the war and later hooks up with this same unit. Things have changed for the better now that the men are hardened by battle and know how to handle themselves in combat. Over the course of the film, Pyle covers their story, the story of every dog-faced infantryman in Uncle Sam's army, as they push towards victory and the inevitable tragedies that come with war. In our cast, we have Robert Mitchum as the officer in charge of this particular unit. Mitchum had been around, but it was Story of G.I. Joe that really put him on the map and got him noticed. Other familiar faces include Freddie Steele as a tough sergeant. Wally Castle plays Private Dondaro. He was in tons of stuff, very familiar face. Farmer Bowery Boy William Billy Benedict is on hand as Private Whitey. Even Bob Hope lent his voice as a radio announcer. And then there was this guy, William Self. If he sounds familiar, well, he was in front of the camera for a while as an actor, but his big claim to fame came later when he became head of television production for 20th Century Fox, as William Self in charge of production. His name was on lots of things, including Lost in Space, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and Batman. And Ernie Pyle himself was played by none other than Burgess Meredith. Ernie Pyle was a real guy. He started as a human interest columnist, and when America joined the war, he signed up to be a war correspondent. He was there during the Battle of Britain, the campaigns in Italy and North Africa, Normandy, and the invasion of Okinawa. His column ran in 400 daily papers and almost as many weeklies. And the men all loved him. Why? Because even though he was pushing 40 and could easily have stayed behind the lines, he was right up there with them. Pyle had an easygoing way about him, and he was also sort of a connection with the folks back home. He routinely mentioned the soldiers' names in his columns, and he earned a reputation as a guy who would tell it like it was. He didn't write about big troop movements and all that sort of thing. He wrote from the perspective of the common, everyday soldier. He became friends with Omar Bradley and Dwight Eisenhower. He wrote a column in 1944 telling America that just as airmen got flight pay, soldiers should get fight pay. The result? Congress passed a bill known as the Ernie Pyle Bill that granted soldiers 50% more pay for combat service. Pyle earned the Pulitzer Prize for his writing that same year. The great William Wellman directed the picture, something he didn't want to do at first. He was a fighter pilot in the First World War and he didn't much care for the infantry. Then he met Pyle in person, and after a few days, that convinced him to take on the project. Some sequences in Story of G.I. Joe use real combat units before they were sent overseas and into action. So yes, some of the men in the background there did not return home. Believe it or not, this wasn't the first time that happened in cinema. In 1919, Abel Gance directed J'accuse, or I Accuse, a French film about the First World War that featured actual soldiers who, at the time of production, were still fighting in that war. In a famous sequence called The March of the Dead, real soldiers on leave from the front were used to play their cinematic counterparts who had been killed, showing the endless futility of war. Not long after, those men returned to the front, and most of them died in combat. Story of G.I. Joe was one of General Eisenhower's favorite movies about the war, and no wonder. It really offers a soldier's eye view of battle, albeit naturally sanitized for the public. It relates anecdotes and experiences from Pyle's columns and a book that he wrote, and it adds in some humor from a military comic strip popular at the time, Bill Malden's Willie and Joe. And yes, this is where the famous action figure got his name from. The real Ernie Pyle, who had approved of Meredith's casting, never lived to see the final result. He was killed covering the war in the Pacific in 1945. A short time later, Japan surrendered, and the war would come to an end. Sure, Story of G.I. Joe is a bit of propaganda for the home front. There's a bit of schmaltz in it, but there really is more to it than that. Mitchum and Meredith are both excellent. Freddie Steele has a great running piece trying to find a record player. And Wally Castle is a lot of fun. And while it looks like it was shot in California, because it was, it still somehow works. It's a fair tribute to Ernie Pyle, war correspondent and friend of the common infantrymen. It's well worth a watch and something different, so I'm giving Story of G.I. Joe 2 3/4 paws up. You take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.